Vaibhav, am I audible? Good evening, Dr. Ritu Santwani. Good evening, Dr. Anju Agrawal, and good evening, all the participants. InnoCase welcomes you on today's webinar series, and today's topic of discussion is hypertensive disorder of pregnancy at Dr. Ritu's show. Myself, Harish Mehta, working as a marketing manager in InnoCare Life Sciences, and my privilege to introduce both the doctors. Dr. Ritu Santwani, she's the moderator of today's webinar series, and she has done MBBS, MD, FICOG, obstetrician and gynecologist. Dr. Ritu Santwani is IVF specialist. Dr. Ritu Santwani, 20 years veteran of obstetrician and gynecology services. Dr. Ritu Santwani specializes in test tube baby and each and every aspect of infertility and provides a comprehensive services in IUI, IVF, ICSI, assisted hatching, egg donation, embryo donation, surrogate motherhood, male infertility, natural infertility treatment, semen banking, embryo freezing, sexual and psychological problems. And Dr. Ritu Santwani always try to give moral and emotional supports to our all infertility patients. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Harish, for the kind words.
Okay, now today's Pundit is Dr. Professor Anju Agrawal. She's a professor, Department of Obstetrician and Gynecology. She's having a more than 100 national and international publication. She has presented number of papers in international and national conferences. She is a winner of various awards. Dr. Anju Agrawal, winner of various awards, like she's a past president of or chairman of North Zone ISO PRB. She's a past president Lucknow chapter of ISO PRB. She is executive member of Lucknow Obstetrician Gynecology. She is involved in the various research projects. She's participated as an expert in development of GOI national guidelines on the calcium supplements, deworming, GDM, and hyperthyroidism in pregnancy and EMOC curriculum. Welcome, ma'am. And this webinar is organized by the InnoCare Life Sciences Private Limited from the makers of InnoFol HB and Pro InnoFol. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Over to you, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you, Harish, and thank you, InnoCare Life Sciences, for constantly supporting this program. Before I start the show, first of all, I want to invite Anju ma'am is my teacher, what we have learned from our teacher. So, ma'am, a very, very warm welcome to you from my side by this lovely roses.
Thank you so much, Ritu. It's such a pleasure to have people like you studying with us.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah. So friends, before I start, give the briefly introduction of my show. As all of you know, we are at present we are having an auspicious Ganesh Utsav occasion, and this celebrated पूरी धूमधाम दिवाली की तरह मनाया जाता है महाराष्ट्र में. Means, but now due to Corona pandemic, this time it is not on that peak. But I want to start with these two lines. गणेश उत्सव के इस पावन पर्व में आपका जीवन सुख शांति और धन्य धान्य से समृद्ध हो, जीवन में आपको हर कदम में सफलता मिले. आप सभी को गणेश उत्सव की शुभकामनाएं. Now I am coming to the topic. As friends, all of you know, the Pundit at Dr. Ritu's show. In this show, I always invite the persons who are very passionate about the teaching. The persons from whom I interview, from whom I learn, whom I admire, and who always has a basic that the knowledge is always increases by the sharing. So I think, in my opinion, knowledge is the power. So let's start earning that. So with due regards, ma'am, with your permission, shall I start this happy virtual hour?
Sure, definitely.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So friends, as all of you know, ma'am is very much expert for this hypertensive disorders and this gestational diabetes mellitus. But today we are going to discuss regarding this hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. Request to you friends, those who are having the questions, please write here in the chat box. Please don't post in the WhatsApp. Those who have joined, ma'am, this program is going live on YouTube and Facebook also. So we have already tagged you, ma'am. It will be visible in your time. So those who are having the questions, please either post on the Facebook or in the YouTube. Don't put on the WhatsApp. So from Facebook or YouTube, Mr. Vaibhav will paste and will share here. So, ma'am, my first question, actually, ma'am and me, when discussed, ma'am has given a very brilliant idea that we can discuss over on the basis of the cases. So that will be more interactive. So, ma'am, my first question to you, Mrs. XY, 35 years old gravida, a primey who is conceived by IVF embryo transfer, coming to us at 32 weeks of gestation with severe headache. Now, how we can proceed this, ma'am?
Now, basically, her main complaint over here is headache.
Yes,
And the
ma'am.
second important thing is that it is a very precious pregnancy, having
Yeah.
conceived by
Yeah.
IVF. So we want her to have a good outcome. We want that in every case, but
Yeah.
definitely it becomes more precious in this case because she might never have another chance to conceive and have a baby. So one of the very important causes of headache in pregnancy is preeclampsia, and which is the one which is the most worrying for us. So having said that, once we find a persistent severe headache, we must think of preeclampsia, but definitely we need to rule out the other causes also. We cannot keep ourselves away from the other causes. So we need to take a very detailed history with special emphasis on other associated findings which may help us to reach to a diagnosis of preeclampsia, like any visual disturbances, epigastric pain, any history that she was told that her blood pressure is raised, a family history of hypertension or preeclampsia in her mother, supposing, or even FGR, if she has been a FGR baby, that is also significant. So a detailed history, examination, looking for the blood pressure, pedal edema, and the abdominal examination to see for the fetal growth. And
Ma'am,
the
yeah.
medical reports.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, actually, this show is attended by all the young budding gynecologists also across the globe. तो मैम मेरे कुछ क्वेश्चन बहुत ही बेसिक होंगे, आप ये मत सोचना आपकी स्टूडेंट वो सब भूल गई जो आपसे वापस पूछ रहे हैं. So मैम, I want that you should please share with us some practical points for the measuring of the BP in these patients.
That in fact is very important because that is one of the factors which we find that at the periphery it is either not being measured, or if it is being measured, it is not being measured properly.
Yeah.
So one, we need to know what equipment to use. Mercury sphygmomanometers are no longer recommended, and automated devices are the device of choice. The other important thing is we need to look for an appropriate cuff size, which should be at least 1.5 times the upper arm circumference. If we use too small a cuff for an obese patient or too big a cuff for a thin patient, we won't get a correct recording. Excuse me. And we need to ensure that once the woman has come, she is allowed to rest in the clinic. We don't see that she is coming hurrying and we make her sit down, come and have your blood pressure taken. We allow her to relax and then take the blood pressure. Make sure she has not had any tobacco or caffeine products in the past 30 minutes at least. And make her sit in a chair, not on a stool, because these are some of the common mistakes which many people are doing. Normally, you will find that there's a stool for the patient to sit on for taking the blood pressure, because the blood pressure is many times taken outside by a junior person and the senior consultant is seen later on. So you must have a chair to measure the blood pressure. Ask the patient to sit comfortably without crossing her legs, and then measure the blood pressure. And on the first visit, it should be measured in both the arms to make sure which arm has the higher blood pressure, because there's always a difference. And usually it is found that the right arm is better. But at the first visit, you need to measure in both the arms. If the patient cannot sit, she is too sick, then you may take in the lying down, but then you have to keep her with a lateral tilt with the sphygmomanometer kept at the level of the heart. It is important that we avoid the supine position because of the supine hypertension syndrome. Because that is something which we find our students are commonly making a mistake. They are measuring the blood pressure in the supine position and then coming up with a lower blood pressure than actually. So the cutoffs we take for blood pressure, I think everyone knows 140 by 90 millimeters of mercury to diagnose preeclampsia. But again, a single reading is not enough. We need to have a repeat reading, repeated at least 4 hours after the first reading. But in case we get a very high reading, 160 by 110, either of the readings, if it is in this range, 160 or 110 or higher than that, then we need to repeat again within a very short span, within 10 to 15 minutes, because delaying treatment in this case puts the woman at risk of intracranial complications. So there we don't have the time to wait for 4 hours.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an elaborate explanation. Ma'am, my next question is that what other investigations are required to confirm that it is preeclampsia?
Preeclampsia, traditionally we have been reading that proteinuria is a mainstay of diagnosis. Now ACOG has brought about some changes. Proteinuria is still there. Proteinuria, again, dipstick, which is commonly used, is not the recommended method. It is a very poor second choice method if other methods are not available. And by dipstick, we need to take 2+ as significant. The best method, the gold standard, is always the 24-hour urinary protein, which should be more than 300 milligrams in 24 hours. A second method is the protein creatinine ratio, which may be more than 0.3 milligram per cc. But having said that, proteinuria is now not necessary to diagnose preeclampsia. In the absence of proteinuria, if hypertension is associated with other changes like thrombocytopenia, altered liver function tests with the SGOT and SGPT being more than twice normal, that is more than 80 units per liter, thrombocytopenia less than 1 lakh platelet count, raised serum creatinine more than 1.1 milligram per cent, new onset persistent headache, as in this case, any visual disturbances, pulmonary edema, all these may signify preeclampsia. So even in the absence of proteinuria, we may diagnose preeclampsia if any of these are present.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, suppose if these symptoms are not present of what you have described, then we can classify as a gestational hypertension?
Yes, if neither proteinuria nor any of these other things like thrombocytopenia, raised liver enzymes, none of these are present, then it will be classified only as gestational hypertension if there is only hypertension.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
You need either proteinuria or any of the other features.
Yeah. Ma'am, please enlighten us regarding the subclassification of preeclampsia according to the time of onset.
That again is very important. It is subclassified into 4 groups. Early onset, where the delivery usually occurs prior to 34 weeks. Preterm preeclampsia, where the delivery usually occurs prior to 37 weeks. And late onset preeclampsia, where the delivery usually occurs at more than 34 weeks. And term preeclampsia, where the delivery is occurring at 37 weeks. It is important to classify because it is a preterm and early onset preeclampsia, which is associated with a poorer maternal and fetal outcome. So in our case, because she's having a headache at 32 weeks, it is a preterm preeclampsia, which is associated with a poorer outcome. So it is important when we are counseling the woman regarding the prognosis.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, how to classify this PET according to the severity?
Severity, ACOG now has divided it into mainly 2 groups. One is severe preeclampsia and the other is the preeclampsia without severe features. So all the additional points which I had told, like thrombocytopenia, deranged renal function, deranged liver function, epigastric pain, visual disturbances, and headache, pulmonary edema, all of these put the patient in the severe preeclampsia range. If it is only hypertension with proteinuria, that too hypertension between 140 by 160 is systolic, and between 90 and 159, 90 and 109 diastolic, then it will be preeclampsia without severe features. So if the blood pressure is systolic 160 or diastolic 110 or more, or any of the additional findings, it becomes severe preeclampsia. And severe preeclampsia again is associated with higher risk of complications and poorer outcome. It is important to remember that proteinuria does not signify the degree of severity. So many times, like previously we used to say it was 1 plus, now it has become 4 plus. In the older classification, it was included in the severity, but now it has been removed from the severity consideration. And that is why, in fact, we don't need to do the, once we have found that proteinuria is present, we don't need to keep on repeating the urine protein levels, because it has no significance in confirming the severity. It only is required for confirming the diagnosis.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, now regarding this patient, please guide us the management for both the ways, from the inpatient and outpatient. From both the ways, please guide us.
For outpatient, all cases of gestational hypertension or preeclampsia without severe features, they can be managed as outpatient cases. But again, they should be counseled that they should be able to monitor the blood pressure at home, and they need to come for more frequent visits, that is on a weekly basis. Any case of preeclampsia with severe features, that is severe preeclampsia, has to be admitted. Or if some cases of preeclampsia without severe features, they are not able to monitor blood pressure at home or not come repeatedly for checkups, then again they too must be admitted. And all of these cases where it is severe preeclampsia, we know it is, and we need to get the lab values repeated. In the lab values, as I told, protein levels are not to be repeated repeatedly, but we need to get the platelet count, the SGOT, SGPT, the serum creatinine, plus monitor the blood pressure and the other symptoms of headache, epigastric pain, and visual disturbances, and the chest, looking for pulmonary edema and in breathlessness. So this monitoring has to be done vigilantly. The lab parameters have to be repeated maximum at 1 week. We may need to repeat them more frequently, but not later than 1 week. Plus, fetal status needs to be monitored for the fetal growth by an ultrasound, and fetal well-being by doing a CTG and a amniotic fluid index.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, so now for this, besides what you have suggested, are very practical points and good take-home messages, ma'am. Now for this, we are going to do the monitoring like this. Now, what treatment we are going to advise the patient?
Treatment is basically monitoring. Antihypertensives are only to be started if the blood pressure is systolic is more than 150 and the diastolic is more than 100. Prior to that, antihypertensives are not recommended, though recently the International Society of Hypertension has come up with some studies where they say a tighter control of blood pressure may improve the outcome, but as of now, it has not yet come in the guidelines. So we are still following the 150 by 100 cutoff for starting antihypertensives. The other important thing we need to remember, advising a lot of bed rest is not going to help the patient. Severe hypertension, we are already admitting. The non-severe hypertension, which we are allowing to remain at home, do not need too much of bed rest. They can only be advised a little extra rest in the daytime. So 8 hours at night and maybe 3 hours in the daytime. But excessive rest is again not advisable. Salt restriction is not required because this is not a salt-dependent hypertension. Diuretics are not recommended because there's already less of plasma volume expansion in the preeclampsia cases. And again, in this case, because she's 32 weeks and she's presenting with headache, which puts her in the severe preeclampsia category, we need to give her dexamethasone for fetal lung maturity.
Yes.
Here it is important to remember that the GOI recommends dexamethasone and not betamethasone because we are not having the appropriate salt available in our country. And because again she is severe preeclampsia, we need to give her magnesium sulfate. We are using the Pritchard regime, but you can use a Zospan for at least 24 hours after admission, and then we can discontinue and keep her under observation in the hospital.
Yeah.
Because again, we don't want to deliver her too early. It is a precious pregnancy. We want her the fetus to be mature.
Yeah. Ma'am, related to this only, I have received one question. As you mentioned this antihypertensive, so which antihypertensive and why? There is one question that has come. Yeah.
The antihypertensive which we are most commonly using is labetalol. For again, if the blood pressure is 160 by 110 or more, so the initial dose of antihypertensive should be intravenous at that time because we want an immediate effect. For which we can use intravenous labetalol or we can use oral nifedipine. It is important, it is an oral dose of nifedipine and never sublingual. So oral dose of nifedipine is easily available even in the peripheral setting. There we give 10 milligrams of nifedipine orally and if required, it can be repeated after 30 minutes. For labetalol, it is given intravenously 20 milligrams, which is repeated after 20 minutes, 40 milligrams. Again, it may be repeated after another 20 minutes if the blood pressure is not controlled and we can give 80. So we can give a total of 220 milligrams of labetalol. So either of the two can be given if there's severe hypertension. For maintenance, we prefer to give oral labetalol, which may be given started at 100 milligrams twice daily, up to a maximum dose of 2400 milligrams per day. Or we can give nifedipine, a retired preparation, orally. But important to remember, nifedipine is always given orally.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, related to this only, one question is by Dr. Mansha Singh. He joined us from the Facebook. Welcome, Dr. Mansha Singh. He is writing, ma'am, as you advise the investigation, what regarding the serum uric acid is monitoring is significant or not for the preeclampsia?
Serum uric acid is not included in the severity profile of preeclampsia. So it may help us in differentiating other causes of hypertension or headache because a raised serum uric acid is associated with preeclampsia, but it is not included for the severity score. So we don't need to keep on repeating the uric acid to see whether the patient is in the severe category or the not severe.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, now we have managed this patient at 32 weeks gestation. Now, ma'am, when we will plan for this delivery of this patient?
All cases of severe preeclampsia as such should be terminated by 34 weeks. And that is why we have already given her steroids for fetal maturity. In the meanwhile, in the intervening 2 weeks, we need to monitor. We will need to terminate if there's any fetal distress at any time, if there's preterm rupture of membranes at any time, if there's abruption, or if the blood pressure is not controlled, she continues to have a high blood pressure despite antihypertensives, or she has epigastric pain, visual disturbances, or she develops a stroke or myocardial infarction or the health syndrome. In all of these cases, we need to terminate the pregnancy for the maternal well-being. If everything remains well, we would like to continue the pregnancy till 34 weeks, then terminate. In case it had been a case of non-severe preeclampsia, we would have liked to continue the pregnancy till at least 37 weeks so that the fetus becomes more mature. Again, if at any time, supposing there's intrauterine death, or by the way, the baby has some lethal congenital malformation, then we need to terminate. Termination is also recommended if the pregnancy had been less than 24 weeks, when we do not expect to be able to carry the pregnancy for such a long period as to attain fetal maturity.
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, now as you advise for this delivery, but now which mode of delivery is preferred, vaginal or cesarean?
Vaginal delivery is always preferred in all cases unless there's a very specific obstetric indication. But again, having said that, in cases of preterm preeclampsia, chances of cesarean become higher because the uterus does not respond to induction so well in the preterm cases. Again, the chances of the baby being able to withstand the stress of labor become poorer. So we need to evaluate everything, the amount of amniotic fluid, any associated fetal growth restriction, and the blood pressure, whether it is controlled or not. If it is very high, uncontrolled, we may need to go in for a cesarean section. Then the inducibility, the cervical rightening, all other factors need to be taken, but definitely vaginal delivery is always preferred. It is important to remember that during labor or cesarean, whatever we are doing, we need to give magnesium sulfate prophylaxis, which has been found to be useful in significantly reducing the risk of convulsions in cases of severe preeclampsia. It is not required in non-severe, but it is definitely required in severe preeclampsia.
Yes.
And at cesarean, it is important that now even spinal anesthesia or epidural, both are considered to be safer than general anesthesia. Because previously there were hitches that in cases of severe preeclampsia or eclampsia, we should give only general. But now even in general anesthesia, we are using spinal, and it has been found to be much safer.
And safer in COVID time also, ma'am. No anesthetist is ready for the general anesthesia. Yeah.
Nowadays,
Yeah. Ma'am, any practical tips you want to guide us for this patient in the postpartum period? How to
postpartum period, it is important that we continue to monitor the blood pressure closely, because many of these patients, they develop fits in the postpartum period. So and a tighter control of blood pressure is required, because in the antenatal period, we are concerned that if we bring down the blood pressure too much, the blood supply to the fetus will be reduced, harming the baby. So in the postnatal period, from the maternal point of view only, we have to think, because the baby is now out. So we need a tighter control. We need to maintain the blood pressure at 120 by 80 millimeters of mercury. Another thing, in the ACOG 2013 guidelines, they had said we should not be giving NSAIDs in the postpartum period in these cases, because it increases the chances of hypertension and renal failure. But in their recent guidelines in 2019, they have reviewed the decision, and now they say NSAIDs are safe and can be given in the postpartum period, and they should be preferred over opioids for analgesia. It is important because these women are volume constricted. They have not undergone so much of plasma expansion. We have to maintain good hydration. So we don't give them diuretics. We make them take ample amount of fluids, which is very important, because in our culture, many times women are not drinking fluids. They are not taking water in the postpartum period because their mothers-in-law are telling them not to drink water. So telling them specifically to drink lots of water, and things like coconut water, mattha, all of which the older women, they are telling them not to drink, is important. So we need to emphasize it repeatedly to them. And we need to monitor the urine output, because some of these women, they tend to go into renal failure in the postpartum period.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, this one Dr. Manasa has joined. Doctor is very curious to know, ma'am, please explain what is atypical preeclampsia.
Atypical preeclampsia is basically women who appear to be having normal blood pressure, but for them it is probably hypertension. It is not coming to our cutoff of 140 by 90. It is maybe 130 by 85 or something. So we feel it is all right, but for them it is raised, and they exhibit all the other features of preeclampsia, like they may have thrombocytopenia along with it. They may even have convulsions along with it in the form of eclampsia. So that is your atypical preeclampsia.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, as in these patients, once we advise this low molecular weight heparin in postpartum period for VTE, so ma'am, up to how long we can give, and is it any monitoring is necessary that time?
Low molecular weight heparin is required because preeclampsia patients are at higher risk of thromboembolism, and ART, IVF, ET is in itself a risk factor for thromboembolism. So we need to give it. Usually it is recommended only for 7 days postpartum, unless there is some associated antiphospholipid antibody syndrome or something, in which case you would need to give it for at least 6 weeks. But otherwise, it is recommended only for 7 days. Monitoring is not required with the low molecular weight heparin, because monitoring is by anti-10A levels, which are generally not available, and it is not recommended also.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, there is one more question related to this. Dr. Sumandeep Grewal has joined, is writing. Good evening, doctors. What is the drug of choice in postpartum period?
In the postpartum period, we can give any antihypertensive. Again, labetalol or nifedipine is always preferred, because ACOG recommends that ACE inhibitors and ARBs, because they are not safe in pregnancy, they should be totally avoided in the reproductive age women, so that they don't end up having them at the time of conception. There's no confusion that they were prescribed in the non-pregnant stage and then they are taking it at the time of conception. So they recommend that the reproductive age women should not be given. But if required, you are not able to control the blood pressure, in the postpartum period, definitely you can use ACE inhibitors. But the only drug which is contraindicated is methyl dopa, which should not be given. But again, that is hardly being used and is not even very freely available nowadays.
Not available, ma'am. Here, so it is not. We are not getting.
Even in Lucknow, it's hardly available. Some people
Okay. Okay. Only labetalol we are using.
Labetalol,
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am, for elaborating so nicely. Ma'am, I'm coming to the next case. Ma'am, this is also like this. A 25-year-old female, G2 para 1 at 12 weeks of pregnancy, approached us for antenatal care. The previous history of stillbirth at 32 weeks and hypertension. Now, how to manage this patient?
So she is again high risk for preeclampsia, and probably she had early onset preeclampsia because she has delivered a stillborn baby at 32 weeks, which is significant. But so we need to screen her for preeclampsia in this pregnancy. Screening as such is recommended in all pregnancies. It does not say that it is to be done only those with a significant past history. It is recommended in all cases, because in screening we are also including the clinical risk factors in the mother, like the history in this case, or history of diabetes mellitus, or a pre-existing hypertension, or a strong family history of hypertension. All are taken in the clinical features. Besides that, for screening, mean arterial pressure management is required. Mean arterial pressure, remember, it has to be measured in both the arms in the method I described initially, and the average of the 4 readings is to be taken to calculate the mean arterial pressure. Plus, we need to get some investigations like the serum placental growth factor and the uterine artery pulsatility index. So if we can get a combination of all four, we can enter it in the Fetal Medicine Foundation website. They have an automatic risk calculator, which is available free of cost for all. So
Okay.
it is recommended for use.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, there is one more question. This is I got from the chat. They're asking, I will discuss this case also, but doctor wants to know, as for the earlier case also you have discussed, any role of the calcium, vitamin C and vitamin E and other supplements?
WHO has and Cochrane review shows that calcium supplementation is required in cases where there's low calcium intake. And in fact, the GOI guidelines, you may know or not know that GOI was not recommending calcium previously. They were only advising iron supplementation. Though as gynecologists, we were writing calcium from all times, but it was not in the GOI recommendations. Now GOI is formulated that guideline basically because of this WHO recommendation that high dose calcium supplementation of about 1.5 to 2 grams helps in reducing the risk of preeclampsia, both early onset and late onset. So the GOI guideline states, because we expect the woman to be taking at least some amount of calcium, so we are recommending 500 milligrams of elemental calcium twice a day to be started at 14 weeks of pregnancy and to be continued till 6 months postpartum. Here it is important to remember that the calcium salt recommended by GOI is calcium carbonate, because it has the highest percentage of elemental calcium. So one tablet has 500 milligrams of elemental calcium and calcium carbonate. All the salts like gluconate, lactate, they have a lesser amount, so we need to give more tablets. So we need to make sure that we give them 500 milligrams of elemental calcium twice a day, which comes out to 1 gram per day. Vitamin C and vitamin E, vitamin D also, which is the latest fad, has not been found to have any role in preventing preeclampsia.
Okay. Ma'am, regarding this use of magnesium, so many companies are coming these days with this.
Not proven as of now.
Okay, ma'am, and regarding the use of probiotics these days, yesterday only one person has approached me. I told him, please send me the studies first. I will study, then I will write the probiotics for this.
Actually, most of these are small studies.
Yeah.
Unless a well-designed RCT is done, we cannot draw conclusions. And again, large number of patients need to be enrolled. And WHO has done a lot of trials for many of these things which are recommended, and they have found it to be not significantly associated with any beneficial effect.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much. Vaibhav, please paste the questions here. So many doctors are putting on the WhatsApp. मेरे लिए बहुत difficult है. मैं तीनों जगह YouTube, Facebook और इसमें तीनों में manage करूँ. हाँ, please paste here the questions. Ma'am, now my next question. Ma'am, what prophylaxis then you suggest for the high risk cases?
The prophylaxis which is clearly recommended is low dose aspirin. The Aspirate trial has proven. It is important to remember that when we give the low dose aspirin, it should preferably be started prior to 16 weeks. Starting it later than 16 weeks is not so beneficial. And that is why screening is recommended in the first trimester between 11 to 14 weeks when we are already doing the aneuploidy screen. So it can be combined with that. And those found to be at risk should be started on aspirin from that time. It is recommended aspirin be given at night because it has been found to be more efficacious when given in the evening. It should be given in the dose of more than 100 milligrams. So the recommended dose now is 150. Previously we were using 75, but now it is 150 milligrams. It is to be given daily. And in this dose, no monitoring for platelet counts or platelet function or bleeding time is required because it has not been found to be causing any side effects. Delayed pressure aspirin should not be used because the efficacy decreases. So unless the woman has a previous gastric ulcer or something, delayed release aspirin is not recommended.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, there is one more question in the WhatsApp. Is it any studies suggesting the correlation of between preeclamptic toxemia and diabetes, gestational diabetes?
Definitely, preeclampsia is more common in women with gestational diabetes because preeclampsia is due to a placental pathology. And in diabetes, there is hyperplacentosis, there is a larger placenta. So chances of preeclampsia are significantly increased in cases of GDM.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, at the last, I want to know, is it any as you told on the fetal medicine that is freely available, we can download and read. Ma'am, is it any model also is coming for the prediction of this maternal and fetal outcome in the preeclampsia cases? So we can download and yes.
That
Yeah.
model, basically when the woman develops preeclampsia,
Yeah,
we
ma'am.
have a preeclampsia integrated estimation of risk score or the PIRE score. There are two formats of the PIRE score, the full PIRES and the mini PIRES. The full PIRES is basically the one which is recommended. Mini PIRES is only for the resource constrained settings, low middle income countries. But again, it is for the periphery. Like at a medical college level, you will not expect to use mini PIRES. You would expect to use full PIRES. So the full PIRES calculator is again available online free of charge. And the points which are considered by them are gestational age, the presence or absence of chest pain and dyspnea, oxygen saturation done by a pulse oximeter, which COVID has made so popular, the platelet count, the SGOT, SGPT, and the serum creatinine levels. So because they expect that in the periphery at PHCs and all, you may not be able to get these investigations done. In those cases, mini PIRES may be done, which is based more on symptoms. We have done a trial at our institution also using both of these. And we have found full PIRES to have a good correlation with the maternal and fetal outcome. So using full PIRES is good. Taking a more than 30% score as a significant risk, and chances of poor outcome are higher in that, and we can use it to help us decide the time of delivery.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, there is one question by Dr. Sandeep Kaur. She's writing, when to stop the heparin before the termination of pregnancy?
Depends on which heparin you are using. The low molecular weight heparin should ideally be stopped at least 24 hours prior to an elective cesarean or 12 hours prior to a induction of labor. While the normal unfractionated heparin can be stopped 6 hours prior, the advantage of the unfractionated heparin at that time, it has an antidote in the form of protamine sulfate, which is not there with low molecular weight heparin. But usually they are not found to really cause bleeding unless the profile is very much deranged. So in the prophylactic doses, usually they do not cause bleeding. But you need to stop it because then you cannot give regional anesthesia unless you have stopped it well in time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am. Mr. Wabo, is there any questions on the Facebook? Ma'am, thank you so much. I am honored that you accepted my invitation on a single request.
I am honored to be with you.
Ma'am, you made my day. You made my day, ma'am. Actually, ma'am, our show time is half an hour only. We already exceeded more than 50 minutes. Huh? So, yeah, ma'am. So, thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us. Thank you so much, ma'am, for clearing our all doubts and confusions. Thank you so much, ma'am. Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Anju Agarwal, and thank you, Dr. Ritu Santwani, for excellent session. And today's topic of discussion was very, very interesting, and majority of the people are asking questions and they are clearing their doubts. And at the last, just wanted to give you a brief idea about the company, the InnoCare Life Sciences, just for a minute, and just wanted to give you an idea about InnoCare Life Sciences. Is a 5 years old company, Mumbai-based company. and it is operating across all India. InnoCare Life Sciences is known for innovation and innovative products, and the majority of the product which we have, that is Innofol HB and Pro Innofol, and the USP of the Innofol HB, which is the first time in India we are coming with the micronization and microencapsulation technology, which we are basically promoting the pregnancy and the lactation. Because of this technology, doctor, there is a 20% rise in hemoglobin level within 2 months and 79% rise in the serum ferritin level within 4 months. And another brand which we have, that is Pro Innofol, which we are also promoting in the pregnancy related issues. So thank you so much for your valuable time, and have a great day. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, friends, bye-bye. Next week, we are having our 25th episode of the Pundit Show. So stay tuned. Next week, again, we are having two very great speakers with us. Yeah. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye, Harish. Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.